attendance sheet for, when you came in, please do so before you go out, because we really do keep track of who comes to our meetings. We're very pleased to have you all here. If you didn't get a copy of the tracker, is it because you didn't pay your dues? I'm probably talking to all the people who paid their dues, but just so that you'll, be clear on what's happening with dues. Membership is down at present, but a lot of dues have come in since that special reminder notice went out. But it shouldn't be necessary for us to send out a reminder notice. Our year runs from January through December, so dues should be paid by January of each year. You can pay them in November, and then they're good for the next year. I mean, we started doing that when we had our first meeting on the 5th of November in 2001. So if you want to pay ahead in November, that's fine, but dues should be paid by January. So tell all your friends, that have neglected to pay their dues. That's the general thing. We do have things for sale. We've still got the note cards, and I've got the wrong price down here, but they're $6 for 10 cards. The Kroger Line book, I think we've got one left. The Cincinnati Revealed book, I think we have one left. And the new thing is, well, it's new and old. Do you remember the video that Susan Abernathy, as she was then, did about Terrace Park a few years ago? And probably a lot of us bought them. I certainly got one. We have those available again, and it's also now put onto a DVD. So if you want to have a DVD rather than a video, you can get that. But that is something that's going to be available. And then we've got the posters that have the same picture on them as the note cards. I hope after the April Village Views article that many of you checked the information that was shown in the building survey. How many of you have looked at the building survey? So quite a few of you have. And I know for some people in our age group, we don't all have computers. So if you want to look at it, find somebody who does have a computer or a grandchild or whatever and can get you in so you can look at it. Because we do have information on all the buildings, all the homes in Terrace Park. It's not complete. There are no doubt mistakes. And we need corrections and additions, and we keep adding information to that all the time. So if you look at it and you find something that you could add, something that you know that we haven't got, we'd be delighted to add it in.
You might add, we had about 90 hits in the last 2 weeks. About 90 different people looked at it in the last 2 weeks.
Which probably is partly as a result of our having, written that article, and actually Lee wrote that article to begin with. He said, well, I think we need an article on the website so people will know, to go look at that. So he went down to the basement, he wrote an article, and it came up, and then I added a bunch of stuff. So it's not just my article, it's both of us this time. And we're always looking for more volunteers to do data entry. Data entry really is going to have to do with making an index for the Village Views. Village Views are very nice to have. They started in '69, but it's not easy to locate information in them unless we have an index. And Leslie started doing that index. But Leslie is working mainly on all the acquisitions, and you have to put a number on everything that you have, and well, it has to do with being able to find it. We're getting to the point where we've got so many things that we can't find them without looking in the computer to see, oh yes, that's on shelf 3, and that sort of thing. So we need more people doing this index to the Village Views. We can always use more people doing oral histories. We have had some people, and we still have people, doing research on their houses. It would be nice if we can have people go downtown to research houses, i.e., in the end, to have researched every house in Terrace Park. Now, that's going to take a while. But to have researched every house as to its ownership all the way through. That really makes things interesting. I should also tell you about our next general meeting, which is going to be September 12th, and it's Wes Cowan, and he's going to be speaking probably mainly about his history detective program that he does mainly in the summer. It's going to have to do with the methods that he uses, or that anybody uses, in tracing a building, tracing whether something was used for, well, if somebody says, oh, I understand that abolitionists lived in this house, but we don't have any proof of that. He will talk about the method that he uses to track down whether that's true or that's not true. Or if somebody's got an object that was presumably used by so-and-so, the method that he uses to track that down. So that'll be the 12th of September. There's a possibility that we might have an extra meeting sometime before then, depending on how far we get with some ideas we have about maybe doing something more with preservation in Terrace Park. And actually that's in a way what my talk's about. What my talk is about is what you see of history when you go around in Terrace Park, because there's a lot of history that you actually see when you go around in Terrace Park, and I just wanted to make people aware of what that is that you're seeing. So I guess that's where we'll start. Now I'm going to stand on the side. This map is very hard to see, I realize that, but it gives you a general idea. I mean, you all, most of you, maybe all of you, live or have lived in Terrace Park, and so you get the general picture. This is where the railroad went through. Actually, originally it was a little north of that, but that's where we might be having the bike trail. And you can see this is St. Thomas Church up here, and this is Lindell's house. So you get the general picture. And these are the present boundaries of Terrace Park, this dotted line around the edge. At our June 2nd, 2002 meeting, Bob Genheimer, acting curator of archaeology at the Cincinnati Museum Center, spoke to us about the mounds and the earthworks built by the very early Indians in the Little Miami River Valley, including what became Terrace Park. Then at our February 2nd, 2003 meeting, Richard Scammihorn, author of Stockades in the Wilderness, spoke about the early stations around Cincinnati, including Cobalt and Round Bottom stations in what is now Terrace Park. So I'm not going to cover that part. I'm going to start after that. Is that focused well?
It's focused as well as we can get it.
Okay. I guess that's it. I'm sure you all remember General Mad Anthony Wayne and his decisive victory over the Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. That victory in general brought the white man's problems with the Indians to an end. The Treaty of Greenville was signed in 1795, taking away from the Indians all but the northwestern section of the territory that in 1803 became the state of Ohio. With the Indians no longer such a threat, settlement was easier. John Smith, a Baptist minister, that's not very clear.
We don't know what to do about it.
Can we do anything with the lines? Will that help? Can you see it well enough? Or? We can turn the lights out. Can we put these down?
I'll try.
That'll help. Sometimes this has been a little good.
Been all day today.
Yeah.
You got such a good press.
That's remarkable, isn't it? I don't understand that. It's like, what are they doing?
You might, who knows? It may be, you know,
Someone please
Technology,
green
I don't
box
know
over
anything
there. What do you want? The empty box over there?
we have a slight pause here. Change the scene. Leslie will fix this, because Leslie's our office manager. And any problems that we have in the Historical Society, as far as the office is concerned, Leslie fixes. We count on her. That's fine. We'll leave it at that. I think you'll get the general idea here.
Don't know
after
how
I
it
think
happened, but we're not touching it.
Okay. So John Smith, a Baptist minister, came out to this area in 1791, first preaching in Columbia, in the area where Lunken Airport is today, and then settling in what is now Terrace Park. What we know as the Smith Lindell House was built somewhere between 1796 and 1799 on Smith's 710-acre Round Bottom Mills farm. It was a rather simple log house, 4 rooms, and a second floor, which has in later years been added onto, enclosing the original log structure. In other words, the log structure is still inside of that building. A great deal could be said about John Smith, since he was not only well known as a Baptist minister, but was also a very successful farmer and businessman. His enterprises did so well that a Round Bottom post office was established there as early as 1804. He was a confidant of Thomas Jefferson and one of Ohio's first 2 senators, having worked in the territorial legislature to promote Ohio statehood. Unfortunately, he was charged with being involved with Aaron Burr's conspiracy after Burr visited him at his Round Bottom farm. As a result, his reputation was ruined, and he died a poor man in Louisiana in 1824. How was it that people were able to get out to our area so easily? The Indians had at least 2 trails going through what became Terrace Park. One of these came into our area near where St. Thomas Church is today, crossing to the Little Miami River near where John Smith built his house. This was a favorite warpath of the Delaware, Shawnee, and Wyandot braves on their way to raid settlements in Kentucky. The other, by 1800, became a wagon road coming out from Cincinnati, past us, and on to Chillicothe. Once the Indian raids had stopped, traffic to and from Cincinnati increased, making our area an even better place to settle. By 1825, this road was in such bad condition that it was made a toll road. The toll house, built in 1869, was unfortunately destroyed as recently as 1998. After Cobalt Station's decline and subsequent burning in 1810, a new structure was built in 1811 using materials from the station. That we know is the Traber Boone home on the corner of Worcester Pike and New Street. Besides materials no longer needed in Cobalt Station, the home was built of bricks made on the site. Some say the home was also supposed to serve in some defensive capacity, but probably that was never needed. Owners of the home have included Judge Alphonso Taft, father of President William Howard Taft and Charles Phelps Taft of the present Taft Museum, Jacob Traber, of whom I'll speak later, and members of the well-known Boone family. Recent owners, Jean and Fletcher Knight, who probably some of you remember, found and opened a small hidden chamber in the cellar. It ran from its dirt floor up to the underside of the first floor and was just large enough for a few people to sit down, maybe 4 feet deep and 6 or 10 feet long. We do not know its use, but they took a sledgehammer and opened things up. William Highlands with his wife came to this area from Pennsylvania in 1802 or 3. He bought farmland here in 1805 and built a log house, which stood near the intersection of Worcester Pike and Indian Hill Road until 1917. They built a second home of brick on the side of the hill across from the present Highlands house, which was built by their son Joseph, but the date is unclear, perhaps as early as 1830. Here's a painting of the back of it done by Terrace Park artist Charles Muir. This house is on the end of Chris Circle, and of course it originally was just facing Worcester Pike, so they're Worcester Pike address. Samuel Moore and his wife came from West Virginia and built their two-story brick house on Given Road in 1830, now in Terrace Park on the end of Redbird Lane. The front of the house originally faced Given Road, where there's now a window, so around one of these windows was originally a door. One can see remnants of the old gravel driveway. You can see it coming from the house down this way. You can still see that over there. The present owner tells us the fireplace, mantel, and side cabinets in the living room are original, as is a small fireplace and mantel in the bedroom above. The place passed from the Moore family to the Basore family that gave its name to the road that eventually was changed to Redbird Lane. 725 Worcester Pike belongs to Carol B. Cole, who was over here, who has another appointment. Often known as the Galloway House, may have been built in 1840 or perhaps later. A ginkgo tree planted there in 1858 still stands. William Galloway ran a nursery here, and one of his employees later moved to the Chicago area and started what eventually became the biggest seed and forest supply company in the world, the George Ball Company. And perhaps you remember I did write an article for the Village News on that. All that information came from Ellis Ronsley, who of course knew a lot about that sort of thing. The Little Miami Railroad was chartered in 1835 to run from Cincinnati to Xenia. By 1840, it ran as far as Milford, which was incorporated in 1836, and earlier called Hageman's Mills. At this time, the railroad ran just north of Terrace Park, rather than straight through the park, as some of us remember. I've never been able to find a picture, but I mean, here it's going straight through, but it evidently went, you know, up this way, maybe the other side of Worcester Pike, I don't know. I haven't found a map that shows that. This is the right-of-way now under discussion, of course, as a bike path. And actually, with the bike path going through, I think we should probably have a historical marker there to say that this is, you know, this was an important right-of-way and had to do with why Terrace Park was here. It's where the Little Miami Railroad went. Much of the ballast for building the railroad came out of two gravel pits in today's Terrace Park. Our first schoolhouse was evidently built about 1840. It stood right next to the present school on Elm Avenue and was a small frame building, but we don't have a picture of that anywhere. It shows on a map of 1847, so we know it was there. School District Number 9 was established in 1853. And the school moved to Worcester Pike and Indian Hill Road, where the building still stands today. Even by 1841, there was interest in tree planting, as Columbia Township trustees planted some silver poplars at Indian Hill and Given Roads. Early settlers found the area covered by trees, mainly oaks, but felled most of them for homes and farmlands. So our tree program began that early. And of course, Terrace Park has been designated as a Tree City USA now since 1985. Now let's get to some of the divisions of land in our area. Montauk was an industrial community in the triangle between Worcester Pike, Sycamore Street, and the Little Miami River. It was named after the highly regarded flour turned out by an early mill there. It became a part of Milford, which it still is. Its plat of 1840 shows a mill race, a canal, and a turning basin to accommodate barges carrying grain from upstream farms to the flour mill, which was its major industry. There were too a hotel, blacksmith shop, a woodworking mill, carpenter shops, the inevitable saloons, a brick Baptist church built in 1847, and a school. All this was pretty much gone by 1900, and most of the rest disappeared after the flood of 1913. The church, like that building, car barn, and Ferry Street are all that is left today. Taking advantage of the Little Miami Railroad and the Cincinnati and Worcester Turnpike, William Winters laid out Camden City in 1857 at the intersection of Gibbon and Indian Hill Roads, which is right here. This is where the schoolhouse and earlier planted trees were, and there was also a blacksmith shop and a saloon. It was across the street from the school that Ewan Tavern was built. Now originally, I just got this from Virginia Marquette the other day, the original building was here. This is the original frame building on the left-hand side. Of course, it didn't probably have that exact door on it, but this is the original frame part. And then the two-story building here was built of hand-fired bricks in addition to this original frame tavern on the left-hand side. And I just learned the other day also that Virginia Berger, who lives up at that corner, Ruth Berger, has some bricks that she saved. She got hold of when the tavern was torn down, and I think she's going to give them to us, which will be very nice. This inn served as a last night stop for farmers from the east driving cattle along the pike before going on to Cincinnati. And before I leave this is, as I said, the original frame part. This is the brick part, and this part was added a little later as a restaurant or a dining room in addition to the inn. You keep talking to people like Virginia, you learn things. By 1873, Camden City had failed, and another area was laid out. Zacchaeus Biggs had bought John Smith's Round Bottom Farm probably about 1809, and his son Thomas had inherited it. In 1869 or before, Thomas built in the Victorian Italianate style what we know as gravel lot. Even before 1873, a two-story frame addition was made to the north side of the house, which the present owners have enlarged. Obviously, we're looking at the south side of the house, but I think you know what that addition looks like. The name of this home probably comes from Biggs' proposed subdivision of the 1870s and the gravel pit on which it and the rest of Terrace Park sits. T.R. Biggs' subdivision gravel lot was in the area south of Douglas Avenue between the railroad and Elm and included his home. This is his home. This is Douglas and Elm, and the present school is across here. So this area was what Thomas Biggs laid out for a subdivision. Now we have a review map, which is very difficult to see. But you could, this is Worcester Pike. Wait a minute, this is the railroad going through here. This is Worcester Pike that arcs up from it. Gravel lot is in here. Camden City is up here at the corners. I'm sorry, they seem to be hard to see today. Another house which needs to be mentioned is now known as the Circus House and is for sale again. And this is the front of it, which is the back of what we see today. However, it too was part of John Smith's Round Bottom Farm, and so was bought by Zacchaeus Biggs about 1809. This is the area I'm talking about. Perhaps as early as 1854, a house was built there, probably by Thomas. In 1885, it was bought by James W. Sibley from the Biggs estate, and then came into the ownership of the Robinson family of circus fame. The Robinson family lived in this house while running their famous circus. and many of the animals at least wintered in the area. This map, which is in the village office, shows the buildings that Robinson had all over, it's mainly the Wrenwood area. And I'm hoping sometime that we can superimpose this on a present-day map so that we will then have an idea of exactly where each building was. We just haven't got to doing that yet. Betsy and I have been supposed to be going to talk to Mr. Graver for I think 3 years now, and I'm hoping we'll get that done pretty soon because he thought he could help us with that. The next slide shows the elephant barn, and probably some of you remember seeing that. Unfortunately, I don't. The circus performers practiced in buildings in different parts of Terrace Park. This building did have open porches, and the acrobats practiced on the porches. Evidently, the family that lived here when Caroline Berger was growing up, when she was quite a young child, this would be Caroline Muir Berger, the artist, one of his daughters. She knew the little girl that lived across the street here. And then when the Robinsons left their house, it was this family that lived in this house that took charge of the Robinsons' house for a while. And Caroline Muir and the little girl that had lived here used to play in the Robinsons' house, and they had a great time trying on costumes. And that was one of the things that Caroline Berger told us about. Even though the early attempts at building a community in our area all failed, it became clear that something was going to succeed, as this seemed a good place to live. I mentioned Jacob Traber before as one of the owners of the so-called Traber Boone House at New and Worcester. He owned all the lands on both sides of the pike in that area, including a vineyard, and is credited with giving Terrace Park its name. Evidently, he ran a naming contest in the 1870s, offering a sewing machine as prize, even though, according to Esther Power, he didn't have any connection with a sewing machine company, but they were coming in then, it might have been a good prize. It's not clear whether anyone actually entered, but the name Terrace Park was firmly established by 1879. A post office was established at about the same time, but was closed briefly in 1890 and reestablished in 1891. There were several men who successfully laid out areas of Terrace Park, mainly between 1886 and 1892. George Washington Corey laid out the area of Park and Western. He is also responsible for building the Baptist Church that you're in right now in 1890. These buildings that we're going to show here were made of poured concrete. I've written about this in the Village News too. The cement had been brought over from Europe as ballast on sailing ships. The story goes that during a depression or a recession or a panic, as they called them then, some barges on the Little Miami River, the owner of some barges on the Little Miami River, suffered bankruptcy. And Corey, George Washington Corey, who lived on Worcester Pike, was able to obtain the powdered cement ballast from the barges for almost nothing. The walls of these buildings, including this one, were poured a few feet at a time using handmade forms. The concrete was scored while still wet to give the building the appearance of having been built of blocks. And this is a very early use of cement as a building material. From time to time we hear about early cement, uses of cement for building material. And they're talking about the early 1900s. This is well back in the 1800s, which is one of the reasons why it's so important that we keep these cement buildings, because they're very unusual. Two Milford men, John Patterson, later governor of Ohio, and J.B. Ewan, a local farmer and businessman, started promoting their subdivision, mainly in the area of failed Camden City. They advertised, "We can build you a good, comfortable house of 6 rooms on a lot 50 by 190 for about $2,000. This includes the cost of the lot. You can build much cheaper at Terrace Park than in the city, and would only say to anyone contemplating a move to the suburbs, don't decide on your location until you've seen Terrace Park. We give free transportation for 1 year to each builder of a house on the little Miami Railroad that came through. St. Thomas Church was built in this area in 1907. And so people have asked me recently, we've seen pictures of this church, and if you're looking at it from up this end, you see a big green space here. Well, that's because the church only came up this far. All the parlor, the entryway, the parlor, that's all added, and it's taken up that lawn space. So in fact, yes, there was a lawn in front of it. This entryway was removed also when the addition was put on. James W. Sibley laid out 4 subdivisions south of Patterson and Ewan, all the way to Stanton Avenue, down here to Stanton, and then beyond. College names were given to the streets north of Amherst. It is probably Sibley who had the so-called railroad or pattern houses built for sale or rent in the 1890s. These were not owned by the railroad. All the land the railroad company owned was where the tracks lay and the gravel pits from which it had mined roadbed material. This is Mickey Davidson. No, let's go back a minute. This is Mickey Davidson's house. The way it was when the Four She's had it, the Davidsons bought it, I think, in the about 1954. This is Stanton out here. This is Lexington. And all that had happened then was they just had this little covered porch on that corner. That's one of the earlier pictures we have of these houses. This would be, filling in this corner would be like filling in on the, I get into trouble with this, but the Normals house, the Lewises aren't here today, so I'm not in trouble with Jeanette McMillan, who also hold this out. But putting this here is like filling in this front corner of the Normals house. And the next slide shows the Glasgow's house on Stanton, this being Stanton out here. And you see what they've done is to fill in the corners. So many of them have filled in the corners. The Normals house, they have not filled in those front corners, so it probably looks more the way they look to begin with than any of the other houses. This map shows possible house sites. I do have up on the table here these maps. Now, John Deal has drawn one map. I've added some others, and the reason I added them was because I read an article written by, I can't think of her first name, but Galloway, in about 1950, and she states that there were 17 built. And her father would have definitely been there when they were being built, so I tried to, put those down. Now, there's one house that I'm not sure is the so-called railroad house, but it's on both what John Deal put together and if I added the Galloway houses. And it's the Troller's house, which was built, at least built for the Conkling family. And the Conkling family are the ones who built the store that's still there on the corner of Harvard and Terrace Place. Now, John Deal and I probably didn't meet about these houses because we're never going to know exactly which they were. But, they're all in the Sibley subdivision, which makes me think that James Sibley is probably the one who had them built, but we don't have any proof of that. And I don't know whether you do you, John? No, I don't. I don't have any proof, so I don't have any proof one way or the other. Chauncey R. Stuntz moved from Milford into his new Victorian farmhouse on Elm Avenue in 1868. That doesn't look quite the way Jack Smith's house looks today, but that's what it was, probably about the time it was built. He owned 17 acres, including what is now Home Street, Myrtle to Marietta, and Marietta to Elm. He was one who took advantage of the easy rail transportation since he was a teacher at Woodward High School and commuted there daily by rail. The Terrace Park Improvement Society was formed in 1890 to try to stave off Cincinnati's idea of making Terrace Park part of Cincinnati. And evidently, Cincinnati about that time was trying to add on quite a few areas. This seems a little far out, but that was one that they were going to annex. Stuntz subdivided his acreage into building lots at this time, and his house still stands, which now looks the way Jack knows it. In the center of lot number 1, the largest in his subdivision. By 1905, many of the lots were sold off, but most were not built on until 1920 to 1960. He accomplished his purpose by subdividing it, but they didn't have to get built on. The anti-annexation effort succeeded and Terrace Park was incorporated as a village in 1893. Here we've got Corey's subdivision with the cement-built buildings, Corey's subdivision. These are crossroads. Patterson and Ewan built up here, and Sibley, all of this down to here, and this section here is the Stuntz one. This hadn't been built yet, but it's part of what Biggs had laid out. He was laying out in this area, but it didn't get built the way he laid it out. The population then, about 1893, was listed as 208. And what was Terrace Park like at this time? Ellis Wansley tells us that Worcester Pike was paved with crushed stone. Oh, and I'm hearing different things, or reading different things about people who had mechanisms for crushing the stone and hauling the stone. And there's quite a lot to be read about that. Other streets were either dirt lanes or strips of gravel. Herman Beck had a little grocery at the corner of Amherst and what had become Elm Avenue, which would be in what's the Village Green now. And Elm Avenue had first been called Liberty Street and then Newtown Road. A little post office and a barber shop stood on the west end of what later became the Village Green. That area and an adjoining block of Terrace Place were designated a business district, along with the Worcester and Elm intersection and what is now Dennison Lane. This next building, the only one in the 400 block of Terrace Place in the 1892 map, was torn down in 1990. It's only 14 years ago. It had served both as a home and as part of that business district. It was used as a post office and store. Village Council met there, and Terrace Park Building and Loan eventually had its office there. In 1980, when the Ohio Historic Inventory was done in our area, it was deemed to be in excellent condition, both inside and out. It was eligible to be on the National Register, as were several other Terrace Park buildings, including the Toll House, which I told you was torn down, I think, in '98. These buildings shouldn't keep being torn down. Back to Ellis Wansley. Each homestead was a mini farm with a horse or so, almost a necessity, a cow, a real asset, and chickens essential to sustain life, if not the peace of the neighborhood, since council had to legislate against letting them run free. Chicken keeping later was common until well into the 1900s, and I'm sure people had chickens also during the Second World War. Maybe hadn't had them and then had them. There was no public water supply. Residents had to rely on wells or cisterns which stored rainwater from the rooftops. And I think your house, Jack, had a cistern at the top, didn't it? Yes. water's gravity-fed in English houses even today. Not the rainwater, but hot water. It comes by gravity. Homes were heated mostly by fireplaces burning wood or coal, and residents used oil lamps for lighting. Electric service was still well in the future, and the only telephone in the area was in Milford. Finances seemed to be a problem from early on, but there was evidently never any thought of bringing in industry. From an 1897 committee report we read, referring to the matter of offering inducements to manufacturers and other enterprises to locate in this village, we beg to report that it is not within the power of the council to offer any inducements of that nature. Furthermore, we believe it is in the interest of the village to discourage the location of anything except residences and features that would make the village attractive as a strictly residential suburb. So now you know why you don't have an industrial, something to change your tax base. Besides convenient train travel, Terrace Park, you remember from earlier programs, boasted not just one but two traction lines. The swing line, this one up here, got underway in 1902 and came from Norwood to Madeira, Ramona at Drake and Shawnee Run, then southeast down through Redbird Hollow to the edge of Terrace Park and across to Milford on its own bridge, which was abandoned in 1920. The Kroger line, it's this one down here, ran its first car through Terrace Park in 1904. That line came out from a station downtown at 5th Street through Walnut Hills, Hyde Park, out Erie Avenue to Worcester Pike, into Terrace Park at the lower end of Elm, followed Elm to Terrace Place, ran alongside the railroad tracks but at road level, across a trestle near St. Thomas Church, and then across the Pike Bridge into Milford. Lee, go back up one slide. 2 slides. Just to tell you where we get things from, we were in Seattle and we got this picture from an Ehret descendant. The Ehrets lived, on this side is Gravelot. On this side is the house that I've written about that looked exactly like Gravelot on this side, but the tracks were running right along there in front of it. So we got this picture by talking to somebody in Seattle, Washington. So now you can go forward again, Lee. Okay, there's the trestle. Terrace Park's railroad station stood across the tracks from the post office. Stone steps led down to just a platform, installed in 1887. It's down on this side. And later to the little building in the last picture on the north side of the track, so that's across from the store. Put up in 1925 and abandoned in 1940. And then this is a map of where the train went and the train schedule. After the early wave of buildings built by the original subdivision people, many houses were built for summer homes along the Little Miami River. I think some people have the misconception that really the way Terrace Park got started was with these summer homes, and as you can see, there actually was a lot that went on in the area long before these summer homes came. But that did lead towards, more development in Terrace Park. So this is one of the summer homes built along the Miami River. Several of these remain, but have since been winterized, and in many cases, of course, added on to. There were also summer camps and clubs by the river near the foot of Oxford Avenue, and others at the end of Miami Avenue, including the Edgewater Club. And I'd like more information about that whole Edgewater area. It's a bit confused in my mind. This is number 1 Oxford Avenue, and it was built for the Terrace Park Country Club, which got its start when Will Irwin came back from Scotland in 1898 with a set of golf clubs. And of course, there was at one time a 9-hole golf course in Terrace Park. The Cincinnati Post in 1902 noted that summer fishing excursionists visit the vicinity in large numbers. The Fresh Air and Convalescent Aid Society also provided summer recreation for inner-city children and their parents just across Worcester Pike. This is now stepping stones. You remember when Ralph Velardo talked to us about his experiences there. And actually, we're in touch with about, I guess, 3 more adults who, as children, came out to the Fresh Air and Convalescent Camp, and we'll try to get them together at some time. We're certainly at least trying to do oral histories with them. Terrace Park is not a very big place. In 1940, it still contained the same 443 acres as when it was incorporated in 1893. The population in 1890 was only 228 people. By 1910, it had doubled to 448, and by 1940 to 858. In 1930, the village bought 8 pieces of land, which became what we now know as Village Green. Since then, Terrace Park has annexed 3 parcels of land. In 1940 and 1957, south and west of the original village, along the Little Miami River, down in this area, and in 1953, north of Worcester Pike, up to Indian Hill. Building within the village was slow, especially during World War II, but after that, a real building boom began. Part of the Patterson and Ewan subdivision was replatted to become Michigan Avenue. We have maps that show it the way it was originally platted. And you know, we have one house on Hawthorne Avenue. It's the Kelly, what's the other name? Sullivan Kelly house. And it is still listed on Hawthorne Avenue. And Hawthorne Avenue was actually never built, as were several other streets, but it was built on what was going to be Hawthorne Avenue. Biggs paper streets were eliminated, and Poplar, Franklin, and Princeton came into being. This part of the village was developed mainly by Harry and Miles Evelyn. They bought most of what had been the T.R. Biggs tract at auction in 1937. Liza Brown, born in Evelyn, tells us that George H. Evelyn, father of Miles and Harry, bought the Terrace Park Lumber Company in 1914. Various members of the family ran the company until the land was finally sold and the lumber yard burned by our volunteer fire department in 1986. George Corey's planned Terrace Avenue was built in 1989 as Dennison Lane, where the lumber company had been. I think it's interesting that Corey, when Terrace Park was very new, was going to have a Terrace Avenue and a Park Avenue. Now, we have Park Avenue, but Terrace Avenue is now Dennison Lane. By 1970, the population reached 2,277. At that time, council considered annexing more land west of the village, which would be down here, along Worcester Pike, mainly for recreation. But since the polls showed not much interest, it was not pursued. I guess that's land that's beyond where the swim club is, but it would have been land that from Tex Clennon. I was just talking with Gwen Nunn this morning. She's going to write up for us some of the early history of the swim club, as she and Bill together. I think you can tell that there's a lot of important history in Terrace Park and older homes that need to be preserved. There are also some newer ones that need preservation. From 1916 through the 1920s and 30s, Sears offered completely prefabricated houses to customers throughout the country. We have several different ones. The Crescent at 903 Elm. These are pictures from the catalog. This is the Somerset, 210 Harvard. The Dover, or perhaps it's the Mansfield, they're very similar. The 314 Harvard, that's Pat Bell's house. The Fullerton at 330 Harvard. The Martha Washington at 308 Marietta. The Del Rey at 315 Miami, the Stanford at 709 Myrtle, I think you know about 709 Myrtle these days, and the Kilbourne at 736 Worcester. We also have a mystery house. 207 Cambridge was built before 1911 for Helen Barnett's grandparents, Will and Emma Bacon's Christopher. Helen's home at 215 Oxford was built in 1912 to 13 for her parents, Raymond and Pearl Breling, used to be Breling Christopher, and is said to be a copy or modification of 209 Cambridge. The architect is known, it's E.J. Schulte. This home looks like a Sears home, the Hollywood, and has interior features of a Sears home. Helen Barnett has architect signed plans for her home before this plan was in the Sears catalog. Is it a precursor of the Hollywood? We're probably never going to know that either. Then I think it's interesting that it's a Sears house that's been recently donated to the Madeira Historical Society for their new home. We also have several prefabricated Gunnison homes. The first one in Terrace Park was built at 822 Floral in 1938-9 for Franklin and Virginia Alter. Ginny went to Indiana to visit the Gunnison factory to find out how they were built. In 1997, she told us, Comey and Shepard was the agent for Gunnison Homes, and Harold Comey sold us the house. Walter Gingrich was the builder. The foundation, with a full basement, was built in 1 week. 3 weeks later, we moved in. Total, 1 month. Mr. Comey even came over and planted flowers in the window boxes. We've got window boxes here. Mr. Comey came and planted flowers there. As with the Sears houses, there were several plans available, and I've got the book up there. I think the Gunnison house that probably looks most as it did when built is Eleanor Gallagher's home at 714 Myrtle. Since there were several plans, this one is a more expanded, lengthened one, was a bigger one than the Walters. We also have Pease home and several built using Better Homes and Gardens plans. Pease homes are mainly on Robin Wood and in Thompson's Terrace Acres, on Indian Hill Road, Fieldstone, and Winding Brook. One more home I should mention is Dick and Carol Hurd's home, built in about 1938 to 41 at the corner of Floral and Stanton. It is one of the few in the international style in the whole Cincinnati area. We did have two, but 323 Harvard was torn down in 1999. There are no doubt others you can think of that are quite distinctive and should remain a part of Terrace Park. So it's clear to me that what we have in Terrace Park is not only interesting history, but also a diversity of homes worth preserving. So where should we go from here? Or what should we do to preserve the history that's Terrace Park? And I want input from everybody in the course of time. So that's all I have to say today. Do you have questions? Other questions? Yes.
When was the Union Tavern torn down?
Oh, do you know the exact date?
I don't know the exact date.
Well, was it there in the 50s?
Oh, yes,
Yes,
oh, yes.
yes.
I want to say the 70s,
The
maybe
70s,
74.
but I can't tell you the time.
If you call me at home, I can tell you, because,
okay. I just
well,
wanted
because we
to-
I
have
have
some
to look it
pictures
up.
taken when it was being torn down.
Yeah.
I think it's 1974. Yes, big project to build that. The log cabin. Yes?
This isn't exactly about the houses, but when I first moved here, I heard something about how it was against the rules to tear down.
What was?
It was against the rules
Oh, it probably, it may very well have been.
that you could tear it down to one wall and call it a
Well, that's still happening. That's still happening at 906 Stanton. There was one wall that was kept. Unfortunately, it was not one of the original walls. That's where that house is. There was a house built there, we have a picture of. It was owned by Casper Smith, who's related to the Robinson family. And when the Richies bought that house, they added on to it. And it's one of their added walls that was kept in order to build the present house. So the original part is there. But some of those older pictures, like that particular one, very interesting to look at because there are no trees around. You know, they're berry patches. The house at the corner of Cambridge and Miami, there are no trees there. So it was a lot of open space. Yes.
When the village green space was bought, was that empty space at the time or were there structures on it?
Well, I imagine there were probably structures on it because there had been that store and the barber shop on the other corner. There may have been other structures. I don't know. I haven't come across that. One thing we have come across, though, is a large plan, and we've got it up in our place of St. Thomas, a large plan for building a community complex for the village, taking up all that green for the fire department and the police and, you know, meeting space, and it was going to take up the whole green, and instead we, fortunately, got the green. So I don't know whether, Virginia, do you remember what the was? Yes.
Are there any pictures of the home that would have been in Elm and Marietta where the school playground is now, that large home?
Yes. That's the house that I was referring to that looked like Gravelot.
Oh, okay,
That's that home. Yes, there are pictures of that. And I wish I knew of what.
Dr. Basinger's house. Dr. Basinger, B-A-S-S-I.
No, that is not your
I think
house.
ours was Dr. Basinger.
Oh, it was, oh,
Since-
that's right, that's right. The one
That was
burned down.
That's the Monty Basinger, yeah, the Stuntz house, the Smith house. I don't think it'll ever be yours. The one you're talking about was originally owned by the Errett family. There were quite a few Erretts living in this, they were early people in Terrace Park. And then it was, belonged to Fenton. And then the school used it, and we do have some pictures and information when the school had programs in there. And then it was torn down. But we still do not know, and I suspect we will never know, why it looked exactly like the house across the street.
They were sisters, weren't they, originally?
What?
I thought they were
That's what we
village
heard.
sisters.
Yeah, that's what you heard. And that has been, well, the problem is that what we've been told, you know, what we've heard back there a while, was that they built it for twin daughters. Well, he didn't have twin daughters. So he would have been built for his twin daughters. You know, we just here have to keep trying to find out more and more information. The other thing that we have that I think I've written about in Village Views is an Errett house. This is another picture I got out in Seattle, Washington. An Errett house that was on that piece of land. It doesn't look anything like the house that you're talking about. And there was a windmill, and it shows in that picture. Ellis Wansley in his book talks about a windmill, and he says, but we don't know where it is. Well, I wish you were alive so we could tell him we've got a picture, you know, that I think would show where it was. Oh, and Helen Barnett remembers playing in that building. I don't know what you call it, a building, but what was the bottom, what had been the bottom of the windmill. And I think they played in it, like, you know, playing dolls or, you know, that sort of thing. So we don't know much about that.
And they burned it down, fire.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And Ellis was involved with that. And they used some kind of new method at the time that was particularly efficient. And you can read about that in the website. A lot of this information is in the website. Yeah.
Why did the store disappear?
What?
Why did the store disappear?
The building didn't disappear. The building, you mean the one up at the corner?
Yeah.
That didn't disappear. I imagine probably that its use as a store may have disappeared the same way a lot of buildings disappeared. I mean, the use disappears because we've got big supermarkets and, you know, people go there, and also whether you can get somebody to run it. I don't know the answer to that, but we're going to try to do more work on the store. But the building is still there, and I think it's It's owned by Paul Kennedy, and I think it's very interesting and excellent what Paul Kennedy did. He, of course, spent a lot of time going in there to buy candy on his way home from school. And he bought the building for his office, but he also has upstairs, way up at the top, various things that were in the store. But he wanted the building to keep some of its look. It didn't look like the original store that you saw a picture of there. But that's why he set his addition back. When he needed more space, he was talking to architects, and they said, well, what you need to do is tear this thing down and start over again. Well, Paul didn't want to do that because it carried a lot of memories for him. And so where he had the front of the store, then his addition is set back, so you can still see what the outline of the store was. However, the outline of the original building isn't what it originally was because there'd been a fire in there. And I'm hearing about more and more buildings in the Terrace Park that have had fires in the attic. And so the roof line is lower than it originally was. There was another fire that in your house, we were burning at that Megan's house on Yale. And that resulted because of leaf burning, and the wind was just right and carried leaves across the street, which set on fire the top of the house. And the man, what did he have stored in there?
Ammunition.
Ammunition. So yeah, anyway, they got across the street, got up there, got the ammunition out, and it didn't blow up. So there are a lot of